You know, I noticed a lot of people try to rush the process of getting in the room or building a relationship, and they rush it, and they're moving too quickly, or they have the selfie mentality. Oh, can I get a picture with you? Like somehow that's going to elevate them on the platform or whatever they're posting it on.
All my 4 mentors, 3 of them, it took over 10 years to develop those relationships. So young people sometimes say, well, I want to get close to someone. How do I get close to somebody? And they think sending a text or an email is going to do it, and it's not going to do it. They think an Instagram post, they think something's going to do that, and it's going to be putting yourself in the room with them and shining there in some way, being an encouragement to them, asking good questions, and you'll start standing out. And one of the things that I've learned about mentoring is if you're going to be mentored, you have to ask the right question. And most people are asking the question what, when in mentoring, you're always asking the question why.
Truth is freedom.
Hello and welcome to Truth is Freedom. I'm Dennis Cummins, the pastor of Experience Church. Glad that you're with us today. Today we have a very special guest, one of my favorite, Pastor Gerald Brooks, Dr. Gerald Brooks, all the way from Plano, Texas, the pastor there, the founding pastor of Grace Outreach Center. And it is so good to have you on this podcast with us, Pastor. Thank you.
Hey, Dennis, I am thrilled to be here. I always love to see you as you soar in so many venues, and I love being a part of this one.
Not bad for special ed, right?
No, you've done remarkable. God's able to wink at our ignorance, and he's batted his eyes at both of ours. So, hey, we're good.
Well, it's the blessing of being around great people like yourself, great personalities, and people that have sown and plowed. And I get to reap from fields that other people have planted, and so I so appreciate that. So, for those of you that are listening and watching, I would say that Pastor Gerald is one of the most innovative speakers when it comes to leadership, especially in the Christian environment. What caused you to look that way, as a pastor? Because a lot of pastors can have different bends, different focuses, different majors. What caused you to lead that direction to teach on leadership?
I think one of the things that always sort of inspired me was that I grew up in literally a military family where my father was career military, so I was on military bases, and I saw leadership. And I saw leadership that was very profound because at the time my dad was serving, there were wars going on and people were going off, and many of them came back and some of them didn't come back. And the thing that I saw more than anything was I saw unselfish leadership. I saw people who would lead for a purpose greater than themselves to achieve something that was more than the average person would. And it was always in my blood, if I can put it that way, about the concept of leadership. That being said, Jesus' model, when you study the Bible, was a leadership model. Mm-hmm. He decided to just take 12 individuals, and he said, I'm going to build the whole foundation of what will be the future of what we call the church on 12 individuals. I'm going to mentor them. I'm going to invest in them, as we would say biblically. I'm going to disciple them. The 12 became 70. The 70 became 120. And as a result of that, this whole world was changed by a leadership paradigm. And in our society today, we try to do mass where Jesus really did leadership, and it's a very profound element. And so that would be the background. One, I grew up at seeing it, and then secondly, the Bible teaches it.
Well, would you be able to identify a pivot point maybe in your ministry when it really became a strong vein?
Well, when you're young, you're just trying to figure out ministry. And so when I started some 48 years ago, I was just trying to figure out where the door was. Solomon said, I don't know where to go in and to come out before the people. And so when you start, you're just confused by everything. But after probably the first 5 to 7 years, I realized that people were going to follow my example. Mm-hmm. And they were going to literally take steps based on the steps that I took. Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. Well, you can say a whole lot of things, but that's leadership. He said, as I'm walking with Jesus, you walk with Jesus. When he said in Ephesians 5, be imitators of Christ, he was saying, hey, there's a model out there that you need to follow. And when he said to Timothy, be thou an example, he me was basically saying, hey, there's someone you look to. And in each one of those cases, we were learning that people watch before they do. So someone has to step out there. And so probably once I got my feet on the ground and realized, hey, why are people around here? And the people who stay here, why did they stay here? It was because they were watching me. And leadership is ultimately your ability to visually demonstrate healthy patterns in a way that people are willing to follow because they think that their life will be better because of it.
When you're looking at your lifestyle of leadership, one of the things that you pointed out that I absolutely love is that there's a lot of theory on leadership when it comes to authors and writing books and things like that, because they're leading in a so-called corporate environment where they pay people to do things, right? And then you make the distinction of leadership in the nonprofit world or the church world. Can you dive into that, the distinction between the two?
Well, leading in the spiritual world is a lot harder than leading in the secular world because, Dennis, as a pastor, you and I do not have any leverage. We can't threaten people and say, hey, we're going to cut your pay if you don't come to church, or we're going to cut your benefits. We have no natural leverage. Our only leverage is influence. And that's what leadership is in its purest sense. But the world leverages with possessions. We leverage with the promise and the purpose of God. And what I know is that if you live a life where people begin to look at your life and say, hey, that's a meaningful life, that's an important life, that's a good life, then people are going to start following you for that reason. Now, what I would say is that in the secular world, you can get away with things that you cannot in the spiritual world. And so in the secular world, you can be on your fifth marriage and still be called a leader. As you do that in the kingdom of God, and people say you're a former pastor. And so it's going to be one of those things that you're on the outside looking in. And so our lives are our message. Paul said that, we're a book that is known and read by all men. And I ask people all the time, I said, if they were looking for your life in a library and you were a book, would they find you under fiction, that everything you're doing is pretending? Would they find you under history, that you had some good moments and those moments are all in the past? Would they find you under drama, that all you are is one moment of drama going to? Or would they find you in a meaningful section of the library that would cause them to want to read about you?
When it comes to growing your leadership, when you say 5 to 7 years, I assume that there were some pivotal relationships that maybe you were drawn towards. Could you tell the younger generation, what does it take to build a relationship with somebody that's above you? What does it take to get into a room that you're not invited into yet? And then not just get in the room, but have the credibility to be invited back into the room. What do those things look like?
Well, first of all, anyone that I followed from a distance before I ever followed them up close. And so the people I would consider key mentors in my life were individuals that my access to them, shows how old I am, was through their tapes and books and those kind of things. But I began to recognize that they had something. And one of the things that I've learned about mentoring is if you're going to be mentored, you have to ask the right question. And most people are asking the question, what? When in mentoring, you're always asking the question, why? Not what are they saying, but why do they say what they're saying? So you want to learn their mind, not just their words. And then I found out how to put myself in the big rooms that everyone was invited to. And so I would go to their meetings and I would be in the rooms, but then there'd be these moments where they would just be talking to someone and I would go up to them and I would, first of all, always encourage. The biggest way to get noticed is be an encourager. And so I would just walk up to him and say, hey, my name's Gerald. I just want you to know how much I enjoyed this. You really, really have done a tremendous job. Thank you so much. Because most people lead with a question. They don't lead by saying thanks. And so when you say thanks, that elevates you from the crowd. And then they would start noticing me, and then they would ask me a question, and they'd say, hey, where are you from? And I'd tell them a little bit of the journey. But you always invest before you withdraw. And so I would always invest with words of encouragement. When I first started, that was all I had. I couldn't give money. I couldn't give anything else other than just saying, hey, I want you to know that this has helped me. This has made me better. You've impacted a room that is different than this room. And I want to say thank you, not just for me, but for my people, because I'll be taking this back to them. And then after they realized that I was sincere about that, they would start inviting, say, hey, we have a different meeting. It's sort of an invitation-only kind of thing where we invite a few people, and then you go to that room. And when you go to that room, you don't walk into any room without being prepared. So I know their information. I know their context. And so when it came Q&A time, I always ask great questions. And when you ask great questions, you stand out because people know that you've studied who they are. So give you an example. I was at the Harvard School of Business several years ago, and it was at an event that I didn't deserve to be in, but there was a man who had basically served with 5 presidents, and he had helped them as an associate, helping them write their speeches, and he did a Q&A, and I asked a question. And he literally stopped in the middle of my question. He says, this is what I love, someone who's read the material and knows how to answer or ask a good question. And it just shut down the room because everyone thought their questions were bad, which they weren't going to. It's just that I had read all the material. I knew what he had done. I asked him a question based on what he did, and it caused to stand out. So number one, get to know people from a distance. When you do get to know them close, get to know them by encouraging them. When there is an invitation to do something, pay the price. And when you pay the price, think through what you're doing, because people don't want to waste their time. And if you're a high-level leader, you want to invest in people who have the capacity to understand the depth of what you're doing. And so when you ask good questions and then eventually they say, hey, why don't you hang out with me? And it became personal. But again, with any of those people, all my 4 mentors, 3 of them, it took over 10 years to develop those relationships. So young people sometimes say, well, I want to get close to someone. How do I get close to somebody? And they think sending a text or an email is going to do it, and it's not going to do it. They think an Instagram post, they think something's going to do that, and it's going to be putting yourself in the room with them and shining there in some way, being an encouragement to them, asking good questions, and you'll start standing out. And then a part of it's also that Amos 3:3 is a part of my life. How can 2 walk together except they agree? And in the Hebrew, it literally says, how can 2 walk together unless there's a divine appointment? And I'm always praying for divine appointments. And so God gives me appointments with people I have no reason to meet, other than I said, God, you know who I need to meet.
Mm-hmm. I notice a lot of people try to rush the process of getting in the room or building a relationship, and they rush it, and they're moving too quickly, or they have the selfie mentality. Oh, can I get a picture with you? Like somehow that's going to elevate them on the platform or whatever they're posting it on. Could we talk a little bit about that misunderstanding of getting a selfie with somebody rather than getting something from them as far as wisdom, knowledge, a download, rather than just an image to put out there to look who I'm with?
Yeah. Well, before I'd ever want to elevate me, I want to encourage them. And I go back to that. So if I only had 90 seconds with somebody, the first thing I'm going to do is be an encouragement to them. Because there's no level of leader, no matter how high they are, that doesn't want encouragement. If you go to literally the Lincoln Presidential Library, there is a place where they have everything that was in his pocket the night that he was assassinated. And if you look at what was in his pocket, there was a little piece of newspaper that was written by somebody, a newspaper reporter, that was positive about him. And here's the man that just led the nation through the greatest divide that our nation has known and literally changed the paradigm of how we are going to conduct ourselves. And yet here he is a little piece of paper that was positive about him, that's what he had in his pocket. And I've never met a leader that didn't want to be encouraged. But I have met a lot of people that are discouraging to leaders, and leaders don't have much time, so you maximize. And the other thing that I tell people is that if you're going to be around a leader, you're going to work on their schedule, not yours. Mm-hmm. And when I've been invited to be with leaders and it's inconvenient, I'm the one who will be inconvenienced because I will figure out how to make it happen. I will figure out how to put myself in the room. And everyone says, oh, it's just not good for me and everything like that. If you want to elevate, the people above you are not going to adjust to you. You adjust to them. So the selfie mindset, I would just say turn it to an encouraging mindset. And I get it, there's a certain degree of validation that comes, well, I was in the room with so-and-so, or I got to see so-and-so, and all that's fine. But encouragement goes further than a picture. Yeah.
So also, I think the other misunderstanding is, when somebody starts to draw close to a potential mentor, they feel like they should always feel good. And many times a strong or a powerful mentor will provoke people unto good works. Let's talk a little bit about that aspect.
None of my leaders would ever look at me and put up with a fault of mine that was going to be an obstacle to me achieving leadership without speaking directly to it. And as I tell people, there's a difference between a mentor and a counselor. A counselor deals with your past. A mentor deals with your potential. A counselor deals with your problems. A mentor deals with your possibilities. And so it's just a different relationship. But when my mentors see me doing something, it's pretty well a one sentence, stop that.
Yeah.
And there's no, well, how do you feel about that? Well, do you feel good? Why do you think you're doing that? None of them have ever.
Yeah.
And if I went to them and said, hey, I need to talk this through, all of them would look at me and say, well, you need to go get a counselor. Mm-hmm. They're not talking to me about my past. They're talking to me about my future. And too many people want to talk about their past, and it's the future that you want to invest in. Yesterday's done. The rock and roll band, the Eagles, have a song called Get Over It. And some things we just need to get over, and we need to move on, and we need to say, hey, bad day, bad moment, bad life, bad experience, that was bad. Now let's move on and do something. But my mentors were always challenging me forward, and the abruptness with which they will talk. Yeah. See, if you can't handle a leader's tough side, mm-hmm. they are not going to spend time with you. See, when they're on the stage, you're going to see their good side.
Yeah.
When you walk close to them, you're going to see their tough side. And if you can't handle that tough side, you just need to be the person who's going to sit in the audience and clap and cheer the things that they're saying. But I've never had a mentor that wasn't literally putting their finger in my chest and saying, hey, you can do better than this. You can think better. You can talk better. You can act better. You can be better than this. And so I would tell everybody, if you want comfort, don't look for a mentor, or for sure don't look for the ones who mentored me, because they were all challenging and they were all very, very direct. And if you can't handle direct, and you're not going to be able to walk with most of the mentors I know.
Yeah. So one thing too, as well, for the younger generations, they want fast promotion. They want to, move much quicker than coming off the builder generation and the boomer generation. There was the day and age where you had to work 2 years at one place before somebody would consider you for a new hire at another place. And so now we're in a different environment, but yet the principles of leadership haven't changed. And so when it comes to being at a higher level of leadership, many times I think of it like, if you climb Mount Everest, the oxygen is a lot less up there, and you have to climatize to those environments, to those elevations. In other words, you get in trouble. And let's talk a bit about leaders that maybe go too high too quickly, and they're not climatized, they're not ready for that level. Even though it looks good, it looks attractive, they see the selfies at the top of the summit and say, I want to do that. But they're just not ready.
Well, I would say to any leader, God's not interested in your timetable. He's interested in his. And Paul put it this way, he hath enabled me who hath considered me faithful. And God's going to look at you, and he's going to determine if you can be faithful. And if you can be faithful over that was his least, he'll give you more. But that is not a people standard if you do what you and I do for a living. That is a God standard. Yep. And it's interesting that if you go study the subject of faith, 3 times in the New Testament, we hear the words, and the just shall live by faith. Romans chapter 1:17, Galatians chapter 3, verse 11, and then Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38, it says, and the just shall live by faith, the just shall live by faith, which is a quote of Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 4, where in the Old Testament, the just shall live by faith. So whether Old Testament or New Testament, God's saying, hey, live by faith. But when it talks about faith in the purest form, where the subject's just faith, in the chapter of Hebrews chapter 11, right before that, and verse 38, when it says, now the just shall live by faith, it's the only place in the New Testament, verse 3 of Habakkuk is quoted, and it says, but what if the Lord tarries? And what it's saying is, can you be a person of faith when God's schedule doesn't match yours? Yeah. What I would say to a young person is this: God's not in a hurry. He's looking for an outcome. And because he's looking for an outcome, he wants to make sure that you can. Because the thing that's worse for the kingdom of God is him positioning someone who has the inability to sustain the position. And then what happens? People have trusted that individual in the name of God, and then that individual fails, and they're going to sit there and hurt other people. See, leadership is about other people. It's about the amplification of your life. It's about the multiplication of your life. And when you have a whole lot of people depending on you, if I do something wrong, there's a lot of people that are going to be devastated now. And God's not going to put you in a position that can be devastating to others. Now, you may put yourself in a position, but God's not going to. Yeah. He's not in a hurry to promote you. So, again, my venue is spiritual leadership. The secular world, job jumping is a part of it. You jump from this job and everything. And so right out of COVID, everyone could jump jobs and they'd make more money. They'd get this, they'd get that. Everyone got to sit at home in their pajamas and work from their computers and do that kind of thing. But that even world is not there anymore in the secular, because even though you can still get a job, businesses are looking for people that they can connect to. And they're going to want to see you at work, not see you on a Zoom call. I mean, it's just not going to be that way. And so what I would say to any young person is, you decide if you want your will or you want his will. Mm-hmm. And if you want his will, then you get his timing. If you want your will, you get your timing. But if you want his will, you get his timing. And so God's not into speed dating. He's not into any kind that's fast. The Bible constantly says, he that believes does not make haste. They're not in a hurry. Yeah. Well. So God will get you where you need to go, when you need to be there, and it will be a part of it. So obviously biblical spiritual leadership is a part of your legacy, and recently you launched Gerald Brooks School of Leadership. And what I think is an incredible legacy to the investment in your life, your legacy, your family, your church, your ministry. You mentioned you tried to do this a couple other times without success, but now you've got this, and you've got we have a campus, obviously. And so let's talk about the School of Leadership, why you pioneered that, why you've launched that, the pulse of your heart. Well, this world's dying for leadership, and it's dying for good leaders. It needs to see good leaders. It needs to see great leaders, and it's so sad. Most of the leaders that they see are deficient leaders in so many obvious ways. But the problem is the church let the world define leadership. Mm-hmm. And the world defined it as 3 things: power. If you have more power, you're a leader. Position, if you have a higher position, you're the leader, or possession. If you have more money, you're the leader. God never defined leadership in any one of those. He defined leadership as the ability to impact and make a difference in other people's lives. And you can make a difference in other people's lives without having a position, without having power, and without having possessions. But because everyone's sitting there saying, I've got to have these three things to be a leader, we find ourselves not creating leaders. And so we wanted to create leaders in three venues. In the homes first. We wanted someone who could be a godly man, a godly husband, a godly dad, a godly mom. We wanted godly people. We wanted leaders in homes. We wanted leaders in our community, people that were going to engage our community and they were going to be great representatives of Christ, and people who were going to lead in the business world. We weren't even trying to create leaders in our church as much as we were trying to create them in those other three venues. And so what I found is that the world will let you talk about leadership, but you have to lead with it. And every other time that I tried to create leaders, I was leading with something that wasn't interesting to them. And so we just started saying, we're going to do leadership. And we talked about leadership, and we talked about leadership. And then we started seeing business people come, and we saw young business people come, and we saw people that had been trapped in a company that just wasn't effective for them, and it wasn't working for them, and they just didn't know how to get out of it. But we began to teach them just pure leadership skills, but with a biblical context. And so we led with leadership, we backfilled with the Bible. And by leading with leadership and backfilling with the Bible, I now have people at our school. Yours was the first school other than ours. And I now have people from other churches that come to our leadership. I now have business people that do not come to our church that are hearing leadership. And the thing is that they want to learn how to lead. But if you're going to make the model just about power, position, and possession, a lot of people are never going to have those three, and they're going to feel like, well, I'm not a leader. And that's not true. Leadership is about, as I tell people, the greatest statement of success is when someone will look at you and say these words, God used you to change my life. That is leadership. God using you to change my life.
So GBSL is an accredited program.
Yes.
2-year, 4-year, depending on where you're at, which campus. But with this, and this is what caught my heart, my passion, and that's why we're doing it here, is your concept of what versus why. And you talked a little bit about it earlier, but unpack that again for the classroom setting.
Well, the secular world of education is about learning to forget. Yeah. So we give you information so you can take a test and then forget it. It doesn't have any shelf life to it. We're not interested in collecting information. We want people to experience transformation. Yeah. We're wanting them to learn the why of life, not just the what of life. Because it's the why of life that multiplies. The what of life will get you on jeopardy, and you'll be able to answer questions. But that's not our goal. We want to be able to transform people. We want to be able to take their hearts, their minds, their habits, and we want to transform them into something that is greater, that is more powerful. And so we're interested in transformation. And so people ask me, they say, hey, when you teach the School of Leadership, when are we going to take our test? I said, when you go to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's your test. Did you take anything from this moment, and did you take it to work? What I can tell you is there's highly educated people that have never taken anything from their classroom to work. But you're not going to go through the School of Leadership and stay in the School of Leadership without taking something from those classes to work. Because we're trying to transform you. We're not trying to inform you. Mm-hmm. Most of you know way more than we do. That's not the question. We want you to be able to live an effective life where your life has impact and influence on other people. And that's the heartbeat. And now we have 7 schools around the nation, and we have probably another 5 to 6 that'll start over the next 18 months. And our whole goal is to find people that have a heartbeat for leadership. And as you know, Dennis, the place that schools work is there has to be a leader, which you are, but then there has to be someone who has the heartbeat to replicate leaders. A lot of people want to lead so that people will follow them.
Right.
But if you're going to develop leaders, a lot of leaders are going to go someplace else. But that's all right. My job is to create a leadership environment, but you're not going to create a leadership environment without putting a room that is designated. This is where, and as I like to put them, it's the only room that I teach in where it's not about a problem.
Yeah.
See, when I teach on Sunday morning, people have problems. No, there's nothing wrong with that. Jesus ministered to needs. When I go pretty well anywhere else, it's because someone has a problem and they're wanting it resolved. But the purity of that room is it's a group of people who've come there and they may have problems, but they're walking in that room because they want to grow.
Yeah, and what I noticed too is it appeals to a broad age span. I've got, those that have graduated high school. I've got people that have been through college. They're later in their careers and they're coming back. I was talking to one gentleman in my church. He's gone through some hard times. And I said, you know what? You're really smart, but you're lacking wisdom. And you don't need more education to get more knowledge. You need to come here to gain the wisdom to how to appropriate the gifts that God has given you. And I have a tool. I have an on-ramp in my church and in my community to develop people and give them a path forward. Yes, they come Sundays, yes, but this is something for me that has been a missing component that I can now offer my community to help them succeed in greater ways.
Well, I had a man from our school north of San Antonio come to me, and I didn't know who he was. He was going to the School of Leadership down there. And I happened to be speaking at that church, and they had facilitated some of their School of Leadership people being in that meeting. And so he came up to me at a break, and he said, I need you to know a little bit about me. And I said, man, I'm thrilled. Tell me about you. Because he was older, and he says, I've been a CEO of 3 companies. And he says, I bought them, built them, sold them. He said, I've done that 3 times. He says, each one of those 3 times I made money. And honestly, I was retired, and this church was starting the School of Leadership, and I just needed something to do. I really wasn't coming for any other reason because I'd already built companies. I'd already sold companies, built companies, sold companies. I'd done that 3 times. But he said, when I stepped into this, he said, it changed me. And he said, it changed me because you took me on the hardest journey. And the hardest journey was this. You took me on the journey from leading with my head to leading with my heart. Mm-hmm. He said it was 18 inches, but it was so profound. And he says, now I'm thinking about going back into business because even though I bought and sold businesses, I now want to do it right.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do. I mean, you can succeed on the world's standards. They're not God's.
Tell the story about the college that, that there is no college that teaches ethics, business ethics, because, that goes back to morality and biblical principles.
Well, after the Enron failure, there was a quest by some business individuals to offer universities money to really form an ethics kind of program for business. And so there's one, I'm not going to name it, but very, very respected, well-named institution that a businessman said, I'm going to give you $10 million today if you will start an ethics class. Well, the president of the school went to all of the professors over the business department and said, we need to start an ethics class. And they said, well, we can't. And they said, well, why can't we? And they said, because business doesn't involve ethics. And he said, for $10 million, it does. Yeah. And so they began to create the first one. But the business world has always been one that freelanced according to values. Mm-hmm. I will make money doing what I can do and what I can do it and maybe get away with it. Now, it's become more wrapped around the concept of doing things in the right way for a lot of reasons now. But still, it is not the inherent part of the business world of this world. The business world of this world says, take them before they take you.
Yeah.
And it is a dog-eat-dog world, and I'm going to be the big dog. And that's their concept. Now, that's not true with every business person because I've met them. Mm-hmm. But what you find is they learn their values somewhere else. They learned it from their grandma, who basically sat them on their lap and read the Bible to them when she was babysitting them. They learned them from their mom, or they learned them from church, or they learned them from somewhere else. But very few people ever learned values doing business.
And that's what I love. Another thing about GBSL is the ethical piece, because the Word of God is stitched and woven through it all, which gives the foundation for what truth is, what righteousness is.
Well, the essence of being a good person is going to come back to what the Bible teaches. And the interesting thing is that you can teach the ethics and you can teach the values and the integrity of the Bible, and most people won't even know unless you tell them it's coming from the Bible, and you literally get that wrapped in you. And so the Bible talks about, from our perspective, the engrafted Word of God that's able to save or change your soul. And so that concept begins to get engrafted in people, and people begin to make good decisions, and they make. I had one man at our school who literally was high up in the mortgage business, but his boss just did not like him. Yeah. And his boss just resisted him. And this is a good man, but he started coming to the School of Leadership, and he started asking a different question. He said, how can I help my boss succeed? And as he began to do that, his boss began to change. And now his boss has been promoted, and his boss said to him, you have my word that everything within me is going to try to give you the position that I just had. But that's totally opposite of the relationship that they had. But it wasn't the boss that changed.
Yeah.
It was the employee who changed, and how they began to appropriate value and creating value upward. And now the value is being distributed downward. But most people want to reap a harvest where they've not planted any field.
Mm-hmm. Well, Pastor, thank you so much. This has been enriching, and I trust people, when they hear this, they open their hearts and their minds to say, what can I do to grow my wisdom bank?
Amen.
And you're an agent to continue to convey that wisdom that God has given and poured into you as you've researched and pulled apart the Word and divided and read books, and you read books bigger than me.
Well, I would say this to you, Dennis. You're doing a fabulous job, and I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful for you. And in the community you're in, you've become a light in the midst of it, and that's what Jesus asked us to be. And you've become salt where there was very little salt, and you've done that in a great way. And so I'm grateful for you. And anyone that would hear this, I would encourage you. This is a safe place to go and to follow.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for being a part of Truth is Freedom. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, send that out, and we will see you in our next episode. God bless you. Thanks.